Hey, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'll just give a few seconds for more people to join in. But thanks for joining. We'll start very briefly. So for our information as well, this is being recorded and we'll make sure that this is made available after we end the session today. I can get started with introductions. My name is Pedro Henriques and I'm the founder and CEO at Bridging. Today, we'll talk about hiring in Portugal and the real costs of employment. We have a small presentation just to go through some numbers that hopefully can address some questions you might have and set the stage for any questions that you have after that. Please feel free to write down on the Q&A box that you should see hopefully somewhere on the right. Write any questions that you might have, and then we'll go through them and try to answer as many as we can today. Today, together with me, we have Natalia, which is our in-house lawyer. Hopefully you should be seeing by now a small presentation, which would be, our name Bridging with a red steel bridge. So hopefully everything is set. All right, I see people joining and we can probably get started. Again, this is being recorded, so anyone that can't join immediately will be able to watch it since the beginning from that recording. All right, so thanks everyone again for joining. My name is Pedro. I'm the founder and CEO in Bridging. I'm joined on this webinar by Natalia, our in-house lawyer, and today we'll be talking about hiring in Portugal and the real cost of employment. Quickly, let's go through a small presentation with some key data that might be useful, and then we'll open for the big majority, the key goal for today, which is questions that you might have. So really quickly on who is actually Bridging. So, for you to have a notion on what is the, the knowledge and what we typically do and work. So first of all, obviously, I guess any good business is made of people, and we do have a fairly senior and diverse and also staff with a lot of different, responsibilities and expertise, including obviously good knowledge about tech, but also, payroll, finance, legal, which is obviously a lot of the things that you would need if you are planning to have a business or hire or even be an employee in Portugal. Quickly about services. So Bridging was established with the goal of helping mostly companies that want to get established in Portugal and to reduce the barriers of entry that bureaucracy can establish. Not only bureaucracy on itself, but also the unknowns about the market. And part of the goal for the webinar today is really to bring you that information. And we'll talk a bit about salary benchmarks really soon, as well as employment costs breakdown, including payroll costs and all of that. And we provide all of that expertise and support in a couple of different ways, from helping companies establish a team. Sometimes it is to relocate an existing team or, some individuals from another location to Portugal. We do provide employer of record service, which would be useful if you don't have a local entity and you need to employ a couple of people in Portugal. More and more, we are seeing requests for a company soft landing, which is the actual fact of establish a company, a subsidiary, and then the ongoing support for that company, which we call company as a service. And the goal here, obviously, is to take care of all matters regarding onboardings, offboardings, payroll, but also monthly accounting, and all of that. And we also have HR just itself as a service. Just the last information here is that we are very used to, most of our customers are within tech, but not exclusively. And we do support currently 26 different countries. So, a very wide range, obviously, a lot of different, considerations, a lot of different experiences. And I would say that from a regulatory perspective, typically, if you're coming outside the European Union, you'll find obviously the biggest, differences and gap, particularly employment law within Europe, does have some similarities because it does have the umbrella of regulation from the European Union. But if you're coming from, in Asia, Africa, or America, it will be quite different. So those, we do have experience with those, and hopefully today we'll mention a couple of that. In any case, feel free to start writing questions as you see fit. Again, we do have a section for that, the Q&A box that you should see to the right of the screen. Now, one of the first data points we want to mention are benchmark of salaries. We do get, as probably 80% or so of the companies we work with are in the tech space. A lot of times the question is, okay, but how much does actually cost me to employ someone in Portugal? And I will tell you that salary information in Portugal is a troublesome matter. Reasons why that is first of all, it's a slightly smaller economy comparing to other countries, and culturally, people don't usually open talk about salaries. So all of that makes slightly different to have good salary informations. Furthermore, as you'll see in a minute, we do have, unfortunately, a little bit of taxation on the high side, and so companies do try to optimize, providing most net value for employees. A lot of times that is with a good benefit package, and that does mean as well that sometimes that does not get fully captured in the salary benchmarks. In any case, and we are obviously work with different sources. The numbers you'll see here are from what we believe is a very good source, which is a report, a salary survey that Robert Walters publishes every year. And the way you should read this table is, first of all, gross annual salary, okay, and well, this year, and for permanent placement. It could be slightly different for short-term engagements, but this is on ongoing perspective if you are looking to employ someone. The roles you'll see on the column to the left will be the different roles, ranging from more seniority roles like development director, project manager, and then a lot of the different expertise. You'll see three different brackets here. So more junior side, mid, and senior. So 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10, and 10 plus years of experience. As expected, higher seniority does mean usually you need to pay a higher salary. And then the color column that you see right next to these values shows the delta, so the evolution in the salaries in the last 2 years. So comparing 2021 and 2023. Obviously, the last few years are very special, very specific. There was a pandemic. There is obviously now a lot of inflation. So a lot of that is captured here. And you'll see that a lot of these salaries in these professions have gone up. Actually, some have gone down, but it's mostly an up arrow throughout the board. You'll also see that some of these roles, and I'll just pick one, like a backend, let's say 5 to 10 years of experience backend developer. You'll see that the range is from 50 to 75K gross annual, which is a very very big margin, right? 25K or 50% margin from the base end of the spectrum. The reason that exists is there's almost different velocities in terms of or different employer types, right? Competing for a lot of times for the same talent. On one side, you can have a local company that is trying to compete for talent that participates in the local economy, which is obviously a little bit smaller. And on the other hand, you might have a global brand, a global company that is also trying to hire, but can offer a substantially higher salary. And so that's why you can see a huge gap in some of these positions. I will tell you that generally speaking, we've seen salaries going up. We've also seen that, comparing to other locations in Europe, which is, more regional, we do see that some of these salaries have kind of become, a bit the same all over the place. And the big factor for that is that with, the possibility to work remotely, a lot of people, and particularly typically the best and more senior talent, can pursue careers and job opportunities elsewhere. without needing to move abroad, and that does tend to push up and almost level up the salaries across the region. So we've definitely seen that. If you wanted to build a team and hire professionals 5 years ago, you would need to pay a lot less for the same expertise. I think it's just a matter of the reality and the dynamics, not only of the market, but all the macroeconomic events. So moving forward from benchmarks, I'll now talk a bit about cost of employment. And this is irrelevant if you are in tech or not. There's just a few things that have a slight impact, like insurances, but most of the case, this is obviously taxation and laws of the country. So it's pretty much indifferent the area you are in. So what you'll see now is, so let's take a midpoint salary like 50K gross annual. In Portugal, we have 14 months. So jokes aside, obviously the year still has 12 calendar months, but it is expected to exist 2 extra months or allowances, which is called the holiday allowance, typically paid before the worker goes on vacation, which is typically around summertime, June most often, and then the Christmas allowance that is paid before Christmas, usually in November. This is, a way to give a little bit more, I guess, money available for vacations and Christmas gifts, and has been a tradition of the country. There was a time where this was divided across the year divided in 12ths. It's still possible to have that, but the default is to actually pay in 14 months, or actually in 12 months, being 2 of those months have double the payment. The other thing that is very, very, very common and everyone expects, even if they don't mention, is the meal allowance. So the great news here is that this is totally tax exempt to a given limit. And the idea here is that the employer will pay for the employee to be able to grab food for lunch. Currently, if paid through a meal card, the maximum amount exempt from taxation is 9.60 euros per workday. On average, you'll have 21 working days per month, and given that you have 1 month vacation, on average you would work 11 months a year, which gives you a total lump sum of around 2,217 euros per year. And if you are employing someone, if someone asks you, okay, so for me to accept joining your company, I'm expecting the 50K gross annual salary, most likely you'll need to add meal allowance on top, because although not mentioned, people do somewhat expect it. Regardless, you can obviously always ask. The other thing that will happen often is people sometimes will either mention monthly gross amount instead of yearly, or they will even mention the net amount per month, which is obviously the money they receive in the bank and can use for expenses. But that does create you a little bit more trouble to be able to calculate back from net to gross and from gross to the total employment costs. And we'll have a bit of a slide on that. But let's focus first what is on top of the gross salary. So on top of it, you essentially have a big contribution, which is the social security contribution of the employer, which is 23.75%. Which is, obviously quite a bit. We do have in Portugal a fairly good social security state, which does include, things like unemployment benefits, payment from Social Security in case you are sick, but also pension when you retire. So all of that is covered through Social Security. So there is not necessarily the expectation of the company to provide any additional pension scheme. Some companies do as a benefit, but I would say not common. Social Security does provide it, but that cut makes also, as you can see here, a significant additional cost for any job created. The column and the line that you'll see striked out was for an additional compensation that existed that was removed earlier this year. So currently this does not exist. The other 2 columns to the right are mandatory labor insurance, which does vary depending on the job spec, and this is because different risks will have different, premiums. For instance, a tech worker that works in an office with a laptop has a lot less risk of injury than comparing to someone that works on a construction, right? And so, it can vary, typically will vary from 0.5% to 1.5% of gross salary. The other things that are mandatory to do is medical examination and, generally speaking, health and safety at work. And so the idea is that the employee goes to a doctor, and there's a guarantee that he has all the conditions to perform a good job and is in healthy conditions. The column to the right about private health insurance, this is not mandatory. Unfortunately, with the public health system getting a little bit worse, still they say pretty good comparing. But as it is getting slightly more time to get appointments and all of that, more and more people are going to have and asking for private health insurance. Although not mandatory for the companies to provide, it has become an expectation. And so the good news is that we can still get fairly good coverages for a fairly low price. What you see here, which is just shy of 40 euros per month, does include very good coverage in terms of amount. So it's something that you can easily build in and have happy staff. The next one. So in summary, before that, a salary of 50K with the meal allowance on top will cost about 65K, everything included. Well, everything but things like training costs, which is actually also mandatory, or any work from home subsidy in case the person you are hiring is working from home. You should pay for electricity costs, as a contribution. So it doesn't add a whole lot. We are talking about 20, 30 euros per month. Actually should be 22 as the last law. But still, generally speaking, if you need to be in a rush and do quick calculations, just add 25% to the gross salary, and it'll get pretty close to what that position will cost in terms of employment. Now, what you see here is a quick chart to give you a bit of an awareness of the taxes and what the net payment is. Unfortunately, we do have a progressive tax rate that gets pretty steep pretty fast. That's because the average salary in Portugal is still fairly low. So a software developer, which does make a fairly good salary for Portuguese standards, will hit a high tax bracket really soon. And so quite in a dramatic fashion, I should say, if you look at in the 70s or 80K gross salary, you're seeing that almost half goes from the cost stays with the state. Part of it is personal income tax. The biggest part of it will be Social Security, right? To fund, again, unemployment benefit, sick, parental leave, maternity leave, and pension. In any case, on the short term, a lot of times employers do look at, how much does it cost the position, and obviously how much the person, the employee, does take home. On lower salaries, big majority of the cost actually goes to salary. Obviously, with the progression, gets a little bit less and less. By the way, this is assuming someone that is married with 2 children. The family circumstance does change the personal income tax. So if you have more kids, you'll pay less. If you are a sole contributor, the sole worker in the family, you'll also pay less. In case you have any deficiency, you'll also pay less. Now, the last slide we have here is the quick rundown on employment contracts and liabilities, which is also a common concern, obviously, of someone wanting to establish an operation. So we are just focusing on 2 areas here. One is work contracts, and I'm sure that might be a few questions that we can use to clarify some questions. But although there are other work contracts, the 3 more typical work contracts would either be a permanent placement. So the idea is that someone that agrees to work with you and is supposed to be forever and ever, although we do know that often doesn't happen, but there's no end foreseeable future. And then you have term contracts, which are contracts that do have an end, and that end could be a fixed term. So let's say you hire someone for 6 months, or could be an uncertain term, which is the case, for instance, that you need someone, for instance, to replace someone on a maternity leave or on an extended sick leave. So you might not be able to, in advance forecast exactly how much time will need that person. So that's one of the justifications for this sort of contracts. Do note that the government by default would love that everyone has a permanent placement work contract. So all of the other types typically need to have a justification to exist. And they also have some limitations, like you can't do back-to-back term contracts on end. The other thing as well, which is a slightly different topic, but in terms of trial period, so on a permanent contract, typically skilled labor, you can have 6 months trial period. If it's a more managerial executive, you can actually extend that to 9 months. And unskilled labor is often a little bit less, or 3 months. The other thing that is important to notice here is that can be a little bit hard to terminate a permanent placement work contract in case obviously there's any serious event, if people don't show up for work, if they commit gross negligence, if they steal, if they beat someone. Obviously there's a very good, easy and clear reason. But if maybe the performance is slightly worse, sometimes it's hard to prove if you want to unilaterally terminate it. Obviously, you can always reach an agreement with the severance pay, and that's usually the most easy way to terminate a permanent work contract. Now, quickly and lastly, to get to questions about misclassification of independent workers. So we do stumble upon this a lot of time. What you need to take here is, if someone is working for you at your orders, at your own schedule, they are a dependent worker and should have a work contract. Okay, and so it is often very easy to prove that someone is misclassified. If they work from your facility with your tools, or with a fixed schedule, or they receive a steady and fixed income from you, or they even have a management, a position of some responsibility, that is proof. Any of this is an alone proof that they are a dependent worker. What is the problem of that is that if you are treating a dependent worker as an independent worker, that misclassification can subject you to fines up to 60K, which is obviously not great. But in case you actually have true independent workers, sometimes they do use what we call green receipts, or in Portuguese, recibos verdes. Some providers also decide to incorporate their own company, and so do a sort of a B2B transaction. Both those setups have some problems. Really quickly, problem with B2B is the fiscal transparency regime. So if someone has a company, but their only business is to invoice to you, the government can determine that that contributor is actually financially dependent from you, and so they will get to pay income tax instead of corporate tax. And with green receipts, the issue typically is, again, if there is a financial dependency, even if it's a true independent worker, but if there is financial dependence, you as the main customer can be called to pay Social Security. And that's usually a very nasty surprise, because it can come, months in the future, that you'll get called to pay a lump sum of the Social Security. So usually we do not advise to engage in such systems. If someone is working for you full-time, long-term, you should go with a regular work contract. Anyway, that's the presentation we have for today. Again, on this call, you have myself, Pedro Henriques, and Natalia, our in-house lawyer. You can always contact us at our site, bridging.pt, or email us at hello@bridging.pt, and I would love to take questions now. I do see there's a few on the box, so maybe we can go through them. All right, so I guess the first one we kind of already answered a bit, but I'll read for everyone. What are the options to hire someone in Portugal if my company does not have a legal entity? So EOR, employee of record, is one, right? So you use the company, and we do provide that employs the person on your behalf, right? You can also, this has some issues and some limitations, but eventually you can also act as a foreign employer. So the foreign employer notion is, you're not a company in the country, you're an employer from abroad. Now, this tends to work best in European Union. I'm not certain actually that is possible outside the European Union, but it does have some practical matters because of it's way harder to actually comply with mandatory requirements such as labor insurance, medical consultations, and all of that. So it feels a bit, grayish in the sense that although completely legal, it's hard to execute and fulfill the legal obligation. So, if you don't do it right, you can easily get into, non-compliance setup. Anything to add, Natalia?
No, I think that's it. You explained it quite well. I don't know if this actually goes and clarifies the question that Gabrielle has.
Well, if not, I'll guess we'll receive another question really soon, right? So I'll just move to the next one then, which is most companies. I heard that most companies prorated the holiday allowance into the base salary on a 12 months payment. Is this common? Um, I won't say that is common. So the thing is, I'll give you a bit of history without being too boring. So about 10 years ago, when Portugal went through the sovereign debt crisis, unfortunately, we did need, we were, as a country, struggling a bit. And the government did need to refrain from paying some of these extra allowances. And so to try to compensate employees to have the cash in the end of the month, they did made by default that people would receive those 2 extra months divided in 12ths or 12th part of each distributed by every month. So that was the status quo for a while, and now it reverted to the previous setup where the most companies do have it, and so by default they are paid in summer and before Christmas. Can a company and an employee agree to have that divided? They can, but by default we went back to the initial norm, I guess. All right, so let's see what we have next. Please cover rules for company cars, childcare vouchers. Very interesting one. So childcare vouchers, it's a great question and actually a great opportunity for providing benefits with tax advantages. Childcare vouchers, which would be for anyone that has the kids on preschool, the company can provide those vouchers, and that is fully exempt from taxation, both Social Security and personal income tax. So you can imagine, let's say that the voucher is for 100 euros, just to facilitate math here. 100 euros as gross salary, you would need to add about 25% employment costs, right? So it would cost you 125 euros, and the employee would receive 100 minus 11% Social Security, so we are at 89, and then minus the personal income tax, which if would be 20%, it would mean that he would only receive, so 89 minus 20, 69 euros, right? So 125 euros cost to 69 euros benefit. If you use the same 100 euros as a childcare voucher, it costs you 100 euros, and the employee fully uses that 100 euros to pay for the kids' school. So as you can see, very easy, way more beneficial. The problem is, I guess, the childcare voucher only makes sense when you have kids in school, right? Or else, you can't really use them. You can also use school vouchers, which would be for schools after school age, so more like education vouchers. And this has a slightly different tax treatment. It is also exempt from Social Security, but not exempt from personal income tax. So still some advantages, but not as much as childcare vouchers. And this is where all these benefits it get really thorny, really complex. Obviously, this is the type of thing we do with the companies we support, because different benefits will have different tax treatments. Rule of thumb: benefits are usually better than gross salary, but the employee needs to obviously value them, right? Now, the other topic of the question is company car, and that's even more complex. Why? Because the car, it really depends on what car you are providing. So again, rule of thumb: if it's an electric car, 100% electric car, still has some tax advantages, right? So making an electric car available to an employee is better than providing the same cost as gross salary. No questions about it. Okay. The problem with that, now you have a car to manage, liability, all of that. But from a pure financial perspective, not liability or risk, it is better. However, if you want to provide a petrol car, gasoline, or something else, it can be actually worse to provide a car than to pay gross salary. Why is this? Because non-electric cars don't get as much advantageous tax treatment. Actually, they get the opposite. They get what is roughly translated as autonomous tributation, which is a sort of a markup on any expenses with such cars. Bit of historical context. The reason why this exists is that sometimes companies, to avoid tax, provide extensively cars to their employees, which sometimes are more for benefit, for personal benefit, than for actually work-related, trips, going for meetings and whatever. And so, assuming that sort of play, the government has introduced that special tax. It still doesn't have it for electric cars, so if possible, go for that. That does maximize and add some value. If not electric, it can be really complex. It depends on the value of the car, if it's hybrid, if it's gas, so can be a little bit complex. All right, so next one. Isn't the 13-month to compensate that in Portugal we are paid monthly and not weekly? No, not really. So we have actually 2 extra months, so the so-called 13th and 14th. And well, as far as I know, has nothing to do with being monthly or weekly. I do know other countries do pay weekly. By default in Portugal is monthly. Maybe we can. I think it's so commonplace and I expect it to have monthly that people don't even think it's possible other way, but I'm sure it is probably possible, right, Natalia?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You can be paid weekly in Portugal or monthly. So this is nothing to do with that. This is mandatory either way.
Yeah, it's just a matter of expectation, right? I think everyone in Portugal is kind of used to get paid monthly, although it's not necessarily something that is the only option. All right, so moving on the questions, and keep them coming. Make this engaging for everyone. All right, so a part-time worker, let's get that. So what about part-time workers? Where are the regulations around that? Well, I guess it's a contract like any other. I don't know if there's any particular question, Acacia, that you want to be answered. I'm not certain I can add necessarily a lot of value, but it's, I guess, anything worth mentioning, Natalia?
Usually part-time workers, there's some specificities, but they are treated as equal as a full-time worker. Yeah, there's not much to be that's different from a full-time worker.
All right, let's see. Right, so we have another one, which is from Kezia as well. If your company is incorporated abroad, can you still employ in Portugal? So without having a local either subsidiary or using a third-party provider like an employer of record, you can use that for an employer setup that I mentioned earlier. Besides being, it's legal, it's just hard to comply with all the minute employment regulations. The other problem that typically you want to have that I haven't mentioned earlier is a permanent establishment risk. So you typically never want, so 2 things. You never want anyone in sales to be as such, because anyone closing deals in a country where you don't have operations can be viewed by the government as a way to avoid sales tax, and so that can get you in a bit of a trouble. The other thing is, if you start having a lot of contributors, it might be argued again that that constitutes permanent establishment, and so you should have a local entity and it directly employ them. So it's not exactly a binary answer, as a lot of times, sometimes laws is personal to each circumstance. So you can, but it's not very practical and it has several risks. So a lot of times it really depends on your needs and your setup, but often we don't recommend that because the risks, the hard to execute, it's can be a little bit less than ideal. All right. So what type of contracts exist in Portugal? So we already covered the permanent and the term ones, but I do know there's a few others. Natalia, if you want to take this one.
There's actually several. They are keep creating more. We've had some legal amendments recently, and they've created more. But the most common and the ones that are more that we use the most here is, as Pedro was referring before, permanent work contracts, fixed term and uncertain term. Being that permanent is what the law wants everyone to have, probably not as good for the employer, but those are the three main types of contracts that we have.
All right. So hopefully that answers the question. If not, feel free to drop another one. All right. So they keep on coming. Let's check this one. So do you have the information, the benefits offered by the Portuguese government, such as hiring employees with lower cost? Oh, yes, good question. And for startups under startup visa program, there are some benefits. I'm not clear on the benefits. Oh, thank you. It is a wonderful information you have provided today. Thanks for the feedback. All right, so incentives from the government. Obviously, things change, and currently I don't believe there's any call open, but I can give you what things to look for. So the first one would be incentives from the local unemployment agency called IEFP. And so they provide typically either incentives for you to provide the first job to a recent graduate, or to employ someone that has been unemployed for some time. There's other particular circumstances like, refugees or victims of domestic abuse, or even former convicts. So, there's a couple of conditions to be eligible to those incentives, but typically is to provide, put back into the work someone that is not working by, a myriad of different reasons. Those calls have been opening every year. Often in 2 calls throughout the year. Currently, they closed. We kind of expect them to open early next year, but if you've been following the news in Portugal, you'll know that the Prime Minister resigned yesterday, so that might throw a wrench into the plans. In any case, something to be somewhat expecting is there are usually calls every year, typically in 2 periods, spring and fall. Some of these calls end up really fast. And so the last one, which I believe opened in September, closed like in 15 days or so. So, you might also want to be fast because, it does have a pre-approved budget for it. So when that money gets used, they call it off. Some of the calls have like a bigger budget. So, it's not like guarantee. What you typically want to have is, work with someone or be, refreshing if you're going to do this so that and apply quickly. And what happens in terms of what is the incentive, right? So that's the second part, the most important part eventually. So the government has tables for different education levels, right? So if you're, a bachelor degree or a master degree, or if you have a doctorate degree, or just secondary or lower education. So according to the levels, they have like a table, okay? And we are talking for a master degree. I believe they changed it, but it should be like 1,050 euros a month gross amount plus meal allowance. And that's the value that they considered. Now, this is not to say that you can't pay more. You can, but they will only provide benefit up to that tabled value, and they don't provide the whole amount. Again, calls do change a bit the amount they contribute with, but it's usually above half, right? So let's say that you want to hire a recent graduate with a master's degree, and that the tabled salary on the application is for just for making it easy, around 1,000 euros, right? You could expect something like 600 to 700 to be paid by the government, and you need to pay the delta. And so obviously it could be a good incentive. Instead, potentially of hiring one, you can hire 2 for the same total cost. So yes, it is a good benefit. The thing is, again, people that are recently graduate or people that have been unemployed, okay? Other incentives, which is way less obvious and a bit harder. From time to time, we have had calls to highly skilled labor, okay? And so that would, for instance, apply to tech workers, which, let's face it, most tech workers are not unemployed, and when they graduate, they already have a couple of job openings, right? So these sort of incentives don't really work on that market dynamics. However, if you want to hire highly skilled labor, which includes tech and other roles obviously as well, there are calls for that. The caveat there is often they are outside big city centers. So the reason why government promotes this is that they want to make people stay in the countryside, so outside the big cities. And so these calls are often coming from a local or regional budget. And so, rules can be different per regions. The budgets can also go up really fast. And calls could be something like they, get published 1 month from now and they last 3 weeks. So it's a bit of a hit and miss. Those are very interesting because they will also participate a big part of the salary. But, it can be almost like a full-time job to be able to find and apply successfully to those. And that's essentially it from an employment benefit perspective. Hopefully that answers the question. All right, so let's moving on to the next one. What about I am a manager of my own company, also working as an independent worker overseas, for which I submit green receipts. Do I need to pay Social Security for both of my jobs? Good question. I'm pretty sure you do not. And I'll let you check on this, Natalia. But my question, if you enable me to return, is if you have your own company in Portugal, why would you want to have green receipts in Portugal? I don't see any particular benefit from having it. But usually no. So for instance, anyone that works, and this happens at times with managing directors, we do that all the time. You do need to pay Social Security. You only need to pay it in one of the companies, not necessarily in all. But anything to add here, Natalia?
No, I would go with that answer too. Not knowing exactly, but that's what it would be my guess.
Okay. So I think, and going back to why would be, obviously I have all of your business reasons, but thinking from, the social and a tax perspective, I don't see any immediate benefit of issuing green receipts if you already have a company, because you can flow everything through the company. Obviously you need a good accountant to have everything done, but you already have the pain of needing that for the company set up. So it's not like it's something that you're adding. So yeah, hopefully that helps. All right. So how does the trial period work? Good question. So I'll just start and then I'll let you complete, Natalia, because this can be thorny. So trial periods, like I mentioned, for permanent work contracts, you have typically 3, 6, or 9 months. If it's unskilled, skilled, or high trust executive positions, within that period, basically things are not working, the employer can terminate one-sided the work arrangement. If on uncertain term contracts, this is usually much shorter. It depends on the term. If it's, I believe, 15 or 1 month notice period. Beyond the notice period, it's completely different, right? So, or the trial period. To let someone go on a permanent, typically we'll need to find a common arrangement, unless there is just cause, obviously, and have a severance payment. But anyway, Natalia, if you want to add a little bit color here.
Yeah, just to add up to what you said. So the trial period is a period, the initial period of the contract, in which both parties can terminate the contract without having to provide a just cause or, in most cases, prior notice. The duration of the trial period varies according to the type of contract and the duration of the contract. So this needs to be defined for each case. It's not like a one size fits all. Like Pedro was saying, for a permanent work contract, usually it's actually 90 days for the majority of workers, but then it can be 180 or 240 based on several situations. Usually, as a general rule for fixed term, it will be 30 days. It can be less, it can be 15 days, it can be more, of course, but this is usually how it works, and it needs to be, as I said, defined on each case specifically. Yeah,
right.
that's it.
So I was going through the questions here, and there's another one here that is really interesting, which is why some bonuses are impacted or subject to personal income tax and Social Security contributions, and others only Social Security. So I think you're slightly wrong because they are always subject to personal income tax, but some are exempt from Social Security. So slightly the opposite. But why is that? And that is a topic of much debate. So rule of thumb, let's go with that, right? So if you have a permanent, a predictable, recurrent bonus that is, like sales commission, right? So, you get, I don't know, 5% of any closed deal, or you get a bonus if you close 20 customers, whatever it is. That is a predictable bonus, and that should be in the payslip and be subject to Social Security and personal income tax. Okay. Bonuses, they are potentially exempt. So there's one, which I don't know if I can translate this to English, but it's called, I'm always missing the name. It's not distribution balance, but it's a similar name. So it is basically the company that decides to share profits after the year end with employees. And so, interesting enough, if that's distributed to managers, it is subject to tax, but if it's to employees, it gets some exemptions. Arguably, and this depends on the interpretation of the law, not predicted, not recurrent bonuses can be exempt from Social Security now. And unpredicted and not recurrent bonuses is not something that is paid every month, not every quarter, not even every year. If you're getting a bonus every year, that's a recurrent. So if you're not paying Social Security on that, you're most likely saving on some taxes that you should be paying. Okay. If it's like big event, something happened, wasn't expected, yes, that could be exempt. So I do see most of the companies kind of abusing this system. So not trying to give you bad news, but eventually some bonuses that are not paying Social Security, they might have been subject to Social Security contributions. Okay, the best way to do this is those distributions of profits that then the company can do. The challenge with that is that it needs to be universal. So in Portugal, we haven't mentioned this, so that's good information. Typically in Portugal, you need to have universality of benefits, meaning you can't have an employee with a meal allowance of X amount and then another employee with the same job of a different value. You can't offer private health insurance to one and then another one with the same job not. You can have categories, like, maybe when they get to a senior position, they get some additional benefits. That's okay. But you can't, two individuals with the same responsibilities, you can't give them different benefits. And so when you're distributing profits, you can't distribute to just a few and not the others, right? So that's the challenge, but there's benefits with that as well. All right. So let's take this one, and this one could be a little bit complex. Well, no, let's answer another one first. So is there an employment program to hire a remunerated intern? Well, it's a work contract, right? So a lot of times universities do promote curricular internships, right? If those are paid or not, I've seen it all. Then you have the internships from the unemployment agency, right? Which is the EFP, giving those incentives for you to provide the first job to someone. That's a work contract. It is slightly different. It actually follows the EFP template, but it's still, it's actually similar to a term contract because usually the internships last 9 months, right? So it's, more akin to a work contract, a term work contract. I don't believe there's any other thing than that, but honest here.
Yeah, regarding EFP, I was going to mention it before when you spoke about this. There's actually several incentives. We've been discussing more about what is called ativar, but there's others destined to other types of people in different contexts. So it's worth having a look at that. Yeah, but I think that would be the option here to reply to João.
Yep. All right. So we have another question about misclassification. Does the employee need to report the company for misclassification? Well, I would say yes. Most indeed. So, those 5 bullets on the presentation, if you are working from, the employer's office with their tools, in their schedule, any of that is enough to, complain to the authorities. And then the employer needs to, eventually will get fined and then needs to actually offer you a work contract. So I'm pretty sure, that you're now imagining, okay, so, I want to engage with green receipts, but this person is actually kind of a dependent worker. If there is a complaint, you will actually be forced to employ that person. And then you won't have the chance to even have a temporary, an uncertain term or term contract. You'll need to provide permanent employment, right, Natalia?
Yep. Yeah, and
So,
yeah, it should actually report. In theory, yeah, it should.
right. So you can see how problematic it can be. Now, do we see this happening often? Not really, but this really depends on first people knowing their rights, right? And the balance of power from employee and employer, right? From an employee perspective, if you believe you're a dependent worker issuing written receipts, you will most likely win a case that you put against the employer. Will then you have a great environment at work? Probably not, right? But you would probably win in justice, right? If you are the employer, you don't want to get that liability. So that's why you should not engage with green receipts, because you might be forced to employ them long term, right? Maybe you just wanted kind of a freelancer for 3 months and you just, let's not do a term contract, let's just go with green receipts. And then suddenly you got stuck to someone for years and years. Okay, so yeah, be careful about that with that. All right, let's see. So what do you advise is the best strategy for employer branding for a company that just entered Portugal? So a little bit of a different question. It's a good one. All right. So, brand equity obviously gets built by having what? By having, the people that speak well. If you have enough critical mass, people will start to, eventually comment and reviewing your company in, job review boards. But before you get to that critical mass, if you are starting, usually an interesting way is simply, and we've seen great results with this. We actually done this with a foreign US company, was do a PR campaign, right? So if you are opening a new hub and you might be trying to do something interesting or exciting, it's not crazy hard to be able with a good PR agent to get featured in publications, and that will, if nothing else, it will ensure that when, for instance, you advertise your job on LinkedIn, and we still see LinkedIn being, particularly in tech, being very relevant source and channel. When someone gets a job, if they'll search for you, they'll see the news. So that just creates a, brand equity and easy. Um, Participating in job fairs could help. It's a matter of ROI. Depends on the type of roles that you're hiring. If you want to hire a lot of recent grads, going to job fairs from universities could be a great way to get a lot of applicants and contact information and CVs. If you want to hire more junior contributors, it's very unlikely that you'll get any on those job fairs, right? So it really depends on the type of roles that you are looking to hire. I would say that building the local brand with some PR seems, the obvious solution that does seem to create value. All right. So now we have, I guess, a couple more green receipts. So can you speak more about green receipts? I guess we already touched a bit. Again, if you have a more specific question, happy to take that. Um, so about the must benefits, how much do they impact the final cost of employment? So I'm assuming here we are talking about benefits that are mandatory. And actually, so meal allowance is not mandatory, very much expected, but not strictly mandatory. Private health insurance, the same, has become more and more expected, but not strictly mandatory. The only thing, and I believe it still is, and last few years, we've seen a lot of changes in regulations, and regulations even mid-year. So what is true today might not be in 3 months from now. But the only, I guess, benefit, if you can call it that, that was made mandatory is the contribution if you are working from home, right? So when the pandemic happened, when people were forced to work from home, people start to complain about, the increased cost in electricity or water, or, now I need to have internet to work. And so the government made it mandatory to compensate people for that costs. For you to have an idea, only recently, and like 1, 2 months ago, there was actually regulation on how to pay that without being subject to taxes in an efficient way. So again, a lot of practical problems of execution, but that was made mandatory. Any other benefits are not really mandatory. You obviously have, personal income tax that they need to withhold, and you do have the Social Security contributions, but that's it. Even the compensation funds, which was a bit of an addition to the Social Security, which by the way was focused on having like a fund in case companies went bankrupt. So the idea was, if your company goes bankrupt, you'll have some money as a sort of a severance payment that you would be able to get from that fund. They ended that, so that's not even that contribution anymore. So I don't know if you're thinking about any particular benefit, but hopefully that answers. Ha. All right. So let's go with this one. And thanks for all the questions, by the way. Very exciting session. We are getting close to the end of the time, so maybe time for one or two more. But I'll take this one because this is something I haven't discussed. How can a company make an employee redundant after he or she is permanent? Right. So this is typically one of the most relevant conversations we have when a company that is not from the EU area is coming to Portugal, notably companies from North America, the United States, where labor laws tend to be a lot more lax. They sometimes get a bit of a hard time to understand the protections we do have in Europe. If you've operated in multiple countries in Europe, I will tell you this as kind of a goalpost. A lot of the regulations about social state and labor law and all of that in Portugal draw some inspiration from France. So when our constitution was written, it drew quite a bit from the French system. I would say today that French is more protective to employees than the Portuguese one, but it's not that crazy different. Okay, so if you think more liberal countries, typically Nordics, UK and Ireland, and obviously North America, it will be a lot easier. Portugal will be slightly more flexible than maybe France and Germany, but not crazy so. So now let's try to address the question. So if you are laying off, if you are going through a hard time on your company and you need to let people restructure and let people go, it's a sad fact of life, but that's something that obviously can happen. The biggest problem comes when you need to let one person go, an individual. And so generally, like I mentioned before, laws and benefits need to be universal. So make things individual, you can get into a hard time. So can you let someone go because they hit someone on the job, they sexually or any other form of harassment was caused, if they stole from you? Yes, of course, because that's a clear just cause, right? Can you end the job position? So let's say that you needed someone. I'll go with tech. It's the one we work the most. So let's say that you were developing a piece of software and you need a software engineer to work on it, but then the software gets done, or you are trying to sell it, nobody buys, and you don't want any software engineers anymore. You can let the person go because you end the job position. But then you can't hire for the same position 1 month after, right? I think you need to wait 2 years or something like that, right, Natalia? Yeah. So it works if it's true, but that's not really a solution if you want just to let that person go and come another, right? So the tricky bit is the person is showing up for work, is not doing any gross negligence, but it's just dragging a bit the feet, and so not having a crazy performance. Can you let someone go based on performance? Yes, but it's very lengthy process. So it is usually better just try to find an agreement with that person. I can give you additional, more operational insight here, which is be always aware of the dynamics of the market for the job positions you have. What I mean by this is, in technology, in computer science, there's plenty of job opportunities. So it is very, very uncommon to see any of these disputes. If things are not working out, the contributor will typically easily find a job elsewhere and will not create much problems. Not, 100% of the cases, but like a big, big majority. However, if you are on an area that there is not a lot of employment, and you might, for instance, be paying a higher salary, that person might not have any chance to go back to the market and get any salary close to their current conditions. And so what that means is that they will look more seriously into their rights not to be let go. So you might get into a bit of a pickle in terms of finding an agreement with the severance payment to let that person go. Sorry that there's no amazing answers, but it is what it is. And I guess we are out of time, actually. So I want to thank you all for showing up today. Really lively discussion. Appreciate you all. The team will follow up with the recording on all of this. And as you see, feel free to drop us a line and get in touch at bridging.pt or through our email hello@bridging.pt. Thanks so much and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.